Alrighty, my topic for today is using land, probate, and newspaper records to find antebellum free ancestors. Our points of discussion are: what types of documentation are available for antebellum free Black people and settlements in northern states? What and where is Timbuctoo? And how does the history of Timbuctoo challenge ideas about such documentation that many of us are accustomed to? And where did I get information about this topic? From my cousin Lillian. In our family, she was the keeper of family pictures and family papers. Pictures like this picture of her from the 1940s, papers like the deeds and other documents from our family property. And one day, my mother and I went to her house because she was going to pass the property on to my mother, expecting that we would, of course, get contemporary typewritten documents. Most of what we got looked like this. This was a deed from the 1829 purchase of 1 acre in Timbuctoo by John Brewer, who was my 4th great grandfather. He paid $30 for an acre in 1829. Deeds like this are a rarity in African American genealogy, I would think, and we were just astounded. He bought a second parcel in 1831. There was a deed for that also. We also got his last will and testament from 1842. He died in 1843. Just the idea that he would have the foresight to organize his business in this way was a surprise. He was not the only Timbuctoo resident that organized their business. There were other wills that we found in subsequent research, but we began to get a picture of our ancestry that we didn't have otherwise by these documents. Having this document gave me a reference I could use to get the inventory of his estate, which told me that his estate included a cow and 2 pigs. It told me what furniture he had in his house. It told me about his wearing apparel. It told me his estate was worth $108. And so I already have an image of him from having a house on the property where he used to live. I now have another image of what he had when he lived there. The most interesting, I think, or most funny, I'll say, of the documents was this indenture of mortgage. This is actually the back of the indenture of mortgage, which was taken out for $155 about 2 years after he died. His wife, daughter, and son-in-law needed money, took out a mortgage from a Jonathan Hilliard, paid it back in amounts of a couple dollars a year for many years. And what's interesting is the 1876 entry. It says, received of John Giles 2,000 bricks at $12 a thousand to pay the interest on the within bond for 1875 and 1876. For years, I thought this meant that John Giles drove up to the Hilliard house with a wagon load of bricks and offloaded them. What it meant, in fact, Jonathan Hilliard owned a brickyard. My ancestors worked there, and chances are they had to make 2,000 bricks to meet this financial obligation. So again, we have another image and another perspective of our family history from this document. So that's just a sampling of all the documents that we have of this particular branch of the family. We also, in many years after we got the documents, I started doing family history research in earnest, and I became aware of a paper called the New Jersey Mirror, which was the major regional paper of this geographic area, published between 1818 and 1947. And it actually included stories about people in Timbuctoo, particularly reports of deaths. The first one that I found of interest, this is actually the first one in sequence, it's not the first one I found, but anyway, it's the death of Hezekiah Hall, who died in February of 1851. He was one of the first 4 Timbuctoo settlers in September 1826. He was a community leader identified in corporation documents, and he was the husband of my 4th great grandmother. It says, in Timbuctoo near Mount Holly on Friday last, February 21st, 1851, Hezekiah Hall, colored, aged about 60 years. The deceased early in life was a slave and belonged to Charles Terrell of Carrollton. People that are students of U.S. history will know that Charles Terrell was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the first elected senator from Maryland. So we know this ancestor was connected to a notable figure in U.S. history. It goes on to say when he escaped from slavery, when he arrived in the area, and then it says he was regarded by everyone as a man of unblemished character, and his truly upright walk and Christian deportment commanded the highest respect. This, not only do we have a picture and history, it's a characterization of the area, I think, to think about how a laborer who was a Black person living in the area in 1851 was recognized like this at the time of his death. It makes a statement about the larger community, and it gives us information about people that in most cases is difficult to find unless your ancestor is a famous person in history, which Hezekiah Hall was not. So now we have another one, which is the death of Lambert Giles, who died in 1875. He was my third great-grandfather. It says, Lambert Giles, a well-known colored man, long a resident of this vicinity, was found dead by the side of the road from Mount Holly to Rancocas near the barn of the late Caleb A. Woodward on Monday evening at about 7:30. It goes on to say that he'd been at work, he was walking at home, that he probably had an epileptic seizure. And then it says that Lambert was an industrious and worthy man, noted for his courtesy of manner, and that he was about 60 years of age. This was one of those people that I've been looking just to get his date of death and birth. I'd been looking for years and couldn't find information, so I was really happy when I found this. But it didn't stop there. The next week, the paper said the sudden demise of the old colored whitewasher Lambert Giles last week put a number of housekeepers on the wing to find somebody to fill his engagements. Lambert followed a humble calling, but was regarded as about perfect in his art, and will be more missed than would be many of our more pretentious citizens. He was often engaged weeks in advance. So we have two newspaper stories. We have his gravestone, which tells us he was born in 1815 and died in 1875. And so I guess I was speechless when I found this, because I just didn't expect this kind of information to be available. And again, I was struck by how people liked my third great-grandfather. These are the grandchildren, mostly grandchildren, and two great-grandchildren of Lambert Giles, born between 1881 and 1917 in Timbuctoo. They're all people, except for one, that I grew up with. And so they would tell stories about growing up in Timbuctoo, and I wished one of them had lived just 10 years longer. I have a lot more information now that I could ask them questions about, but these are the people I think about when I think about Timbuctoo. So I want to summarize those documents now briefly. First, we have the original deeds conveying the premises to John Brewer in 1829 and 1831, which gave me his name, which I didn't know before, as well as his probable location in the 1830 census. We have his will from 1842, which give me the name of his wife and daughter, my third and fourth great grandmothers, their probable location in the census, and the documentation I needed to get the inventory of his estate. I have the indenture of mortgage, which gives the name of my third great grandfather, which I didn't know before. And it also introduces a name associated with present day families. So that was an important reference. We have the mortgage payment receipts, which I reviewed before, that talk about the payments and the interesting story, the funny story about paying the mortgage with bricks. And we have a deed from 1930, which makes reference to a lot of the prior information of the old deeds when describing the chain of title. Then we have searchable databases, which include the New Jersey Births and Christening Index and the New Jersey Deaths and Burials Index, where I found family births beginning in 1850 and family deaths as early as 1872. We have the New Jersey Mirror Index. It's not totally indexed, but it's partially indexed so that I can put in a name or a search term related to an event and find historical information about the African American community in the area. And of course, we're all familiar with the census as a search tool that we have on Ancestry.com. So all of this information is about Timbuctoo, settled beginning in 1826 by formerly enslaved and free African Americans with the assistance of Quakers. It was one of many such settlements in southern New Jersey, and it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. These people listed here are represent the first 24 land transactions in Timbuctoo, as well as some institutions established in Timbuctoo. And we know, for example, that the first 4 buyers did their transactions in September of 1826, paying between $8.33 and $24.05 for parcels between 1 acre and 1.5 acres. Let's talk a little bit about community development in Timbuctoo as we move towards a close. The first and by far most important document, in my view, in the collection of documents is the deed for the purchase of the African Union School, which was purchased in 1834. In addition to the legal references of buyers and sellers and dimensions, it says, whereas in the settlement of Timbuctoo and in the vicinity thereof, there are many people of color, so-called, who seem sensible of the advantages of a suitable school education and are destitute for a house for that purpose. And the said Peter Quire, his wife, in consideration of the premises and the affection they bear to the people of color and the desire they have to promote their true and best interests, are minded to settle, give, grant, and convey said premises for the uses and intents hereinafter pointed out and described. And then it goes on to say that future trustees must be people of color that live within 10 miles of the premises. Remember, this is 1834. This is Black people establishing a school. This is a document that was a legal document that was filed in the county clerk's office. I suppose we could talk about this for about 15 minutes if we wanted to, because it has so much information and raises so many questions. Certainly put your questions in the chat and we can maybe discuss it a little further after we're finished. We also have another deed for land purchase to establish the the Zion Wesleyan Methodist Episcopal African Church of Timbuctoo. The deed tells us that it was an AME Zion church, that it would also include a cemetery, and it tells us other information about the AME Zion history as well. This is a picture of our cemetery, including interpretive signage that we put up maybe 3 years ago to teach lessons about Timbuctoo. And we know that the cemetery includes graves of US colored troops that fought in the Civil War, as well as civilians, all of whom were associated with the church. I like to close with this slide, which is a portrait of the United States in 1830 and trends in manumission of slaves, enslaved people. If you look at the colors according to the legend on the left, you see that the northern states had much higher proportions of free people than the southern states. That's no surprise. And you also see the dates at which each one of those states passed manumission laws for the first time. They were usually gradual manumission laws, but nevertheless, they set the process of manumission in motion. And what that tells us is that Timbuctoo is not unique. Probably in many of these other states, there are similar stories that we can learn from. So we should research those stories and make sure they are known. And lastly, we have my name and my website and my email address. If you would like any further information, there's lots of information on the website. You could also send me an email if you have any questions. And I thank you very much for your attention.